It's the early 1970s. Computers are becoming increasingly powerful, and so is the software that controls them. People, our users, are struggling to keep up with this change. This is the status quo. In this early era of computing, you pick up a textbook, you learn commands. You then have to understand these commands because every computer you use, most of the time, uses these specifically. You know, there are few conventions, few standards of functionality, and it's not user-friendly at all. The concept of designing for our users, it hasn't happened yet, but it's around the corner. This would soon change, though. And so, in the early 1970s, a visionary team of engineers at Xerox PARC thankfully saw the need for a better way. They gave us the first ever graphical user interfaces, and as part of this, introduced the Xerox Alto to the world. This new paradigm needed a new way to handle input, and so they also gave us the mouse that you can see there. Over the next decade or so, this would kind of start to gain some momentum, and they would introduce more visual elements to help us control these systems. And so we now know one of these as the drop-down list. These inventions were revolutionary because they helped us to understand these complex systems and democratize the use of them. To make human sense of this complexity and make it allow more people to get in there and start using computers. So, drop-down lists were an important part of this revolution because at their core, they ask a question and they allow us to select an answer. What is your favorite food? Yeah, that's usually the answer. So, just select an answer from this list that we've conveniently selected for you. Great, we say. No commands to learn or guess. Amazing. And then you select, read, and what could go wrong? Well, quite a lot actually. Seduced by the simplicity and reliability, the world and the people that made software and the people that used it got really good at using drop-down lists. So good, in fact, that they sprouted up like weeds. They took over most of the internet and most of the software and applications that we used. So perhaps unsurprisingly, we stopped questioning their effectiveness. Drop-down lists became our go-to for just about everything and anything. We became complacent, and yes, we became lazy. And this laziness is a really big problem. And it's the reason why a lot of terrible user experiences continue to exist. And terrible, we say? Yes, terrible. And here are the six key reasons why. 1, drop-down lists were never designed for mobile devices, yet drop-downs as relics of the desktop era are everywhere. They just really suck on small screens, take up a lot of space. Half the time you can't even see the question that it's asking. So consider this. 50%, more than 50% for years now, of traffic online and on apps has been on these devices. And I could end my talk right now, but I'm just getting started. 2, a list is just a list. They're so limiting. If you think about the types of questions and answers that we need, if it needs to be better represented visually, or if it's more complex than a word or two, the world's data is richer and more complex than this list will ever be able to handle. 3, that says it all, really, doesn't it? They force us to work needlessly harder. We have to click to see the answers. We have to read through a long list, scan, try and find something that may not be immediately obvious. It's not smooth for the user, and in user experience design, we call this friction. 4, drop-down lists can reinforce or force a bias that may even be discriminatory. We're taking away the ability for people to speak in their own language. And when we arrange things in a certain way, we may even unintentionally be enabling this. Of more concern, though, is that doing it intentionally as a way of reinforcing a stereotype or to discriminate against an individual or group. 5. The drop-down lists are just humans dumbing down to a computer's level. Drop-downs made sense for the software and hardware of the 1970s, but we're in 2016. Our computers are so much more powerful and they can gather inputs in so many other ways. We shouldn't have to be held to this inflexible, outdated 40-year-old element. The world has moved on. For example, the phone that I have allows me to log in using my fingerprint. Imagine trying to use a drop-down for that. And 6, and my final point. A design that uses drop-downs by default is fundamentally lazy. And this may meet our needs, but using them just because they do that it's not okay. Would we rather not words that describe our interfaces as intuitive, effortless? Because if we truly want people's attention and we want their time, we must respect what we do with it. This poor default approach, for the reasons I've just talked about, is the exact opposite of this. So, this is why drop-downs must die. The great thing is that drop-downs are already on their way out and can often be avoided. To do so requires us to move into a different way of thinking, beyond defined, explicit questions and answers, to a more human and contextual way of thinking. We must be mindful. We must consider what we're asking and when we're asking, rather than just the answers that we would like to receive. Ultimately, we must find ways to remove this friction that exists between humans and computers. So how do we get there? I've already hinted at it. The devices that we use today allow us to collect many types of information without the user needing to lift a finger. Smartphones, laptops, wearables, apps, websites, they all have sensors of various kinds. A sensor might be the GPS signal that comes in your phone, or a cookie on a website that remembers your visit. These sensors, when combined with thoughtful, user-centered design, can become incredibly powerful. You're no longer keying in a PIN, the phone recognizes you, and you're logged in. An Uber driver arrives because they know who you are and where you are. Not a single drop-down list is required. The common thread here is that the software is inherently designed to preempt the need for your input. This has the effect of smoothing out this friction and the moments within an experience, and that's the definition of. Best practices are constantly changing, and it can be hard to keep up. It can be a bit scary for our products and our websites. But if we wish to do our bit and kill drop-downs, what are the other approaches that we can take? And here are 7 of the big ones. 1, kill your drop-down and use a radio button. This is probably the most overlooked solution, but it's also the easiest. When you've just got a few answers, just show them. It takes 1 click or 1 press, and if you set a default, they can probably skip the question altogether. 2, for ranges and increments, use a slider. The great thing about this is that the user will work out the answer that's right for them, and they'll be in control of it. 3, use visual design as your ally. Clearly present answers in a grid or other layout so that they can merely select one. You can only do so much with a list, so break free of the format altogether and use visual design as your ally. 4, display things as they truly are. Show colours as colours. Use images to overcome the limitations of language. Ultimately, be literal, and the world will thank you for it. 5, collect data without asking the question. Are we still in that era, 1999? What country are you in? No. Just detect my location, or look through my IP address, and serve me up the right localized content or experience. Just make sure that you're giving people the ability to undo this. And 6, use the hardware that is available. Take a phone, for example. You've got a camera, an NFC chip in there, that can scan a credit card to take a payment or store those details. Just be mindful of security and privacy. 7, and this is an interesting one, consider a chatbot. This area is really growing right now, and it really shows how far we've come. Bots can react to a user's input as they can interpret language. This power to facilitate this varied input and then pivot their questioning makes them ideal as not just a drop-down killer, but a form killer. And there's always a but, even the most drop-down hating designer in the world might still admit that drop-downs have a place in this world. This, of course, is that we take some measures to make them a bit less dreadful than they usually are. Because good design always recognizes and always works with constraints to deliver an improvement. So, 1, apply thoughtful ordering. It's quite simple. You can use analytics to determine the most commonly selected answer and then set this as the first one. In doing so, you'll make the drop-down more efficient because the first answer that they read will be the first thing that they will likely need to select. 2, avoid using select as a label and set a default instead. The great thing about this is that most people will then be able to skip the drop-down altogether. 3, going a little further, personalize. Use context. Think about the last thing that they asked or some kind of information that may allow us to select something from the list. Again, this is all about efficiency. And 4, for long lists, introduce predictive search. This is great because it allows people to type through a very long list and find an answer very quickly. You hold the integrity of the list, but you gain this extra usability out of it. So, ultimately, if we all work hard enough, drop-downs will continue on their way to extinction. But to do so requires us all to be a bit more mindful, to seek instead of asking. So, I ask and challenge you. Seek a drop-down list in your life and fucking kill it. Thank you.